My name is Ethan. 3 years ago, I was a broke college student living on instant noodles, energy drinks, and false hope. I was studying computer science at a small university 2 hours from my hometown. Tuition was expensive, rent was worse. My parents helped when they could, but they were already struggling. By October, I was behind on rent. By November, my landlord started leaving notes. By December, I was desperate. So one night, while sitting in my tiny apartment with exactly $17.43 in my bank account, I started scrolling through job listings. Fast food, warehouse, delivery driver, nothing paid enough. Then I found it. Night cashier needed. Location, Red Pine gas station, hours 11 p.m., 7 a.m. Pay $45 hour, no experience required. Immediate hire. I nearly laughed. $45 an hour? For a gas station? The listing looks strangely plain. No company logo, no employee reviews, no photos, just an address and an email. I assumed it was fake. Still, I sent an application. 10 minutes later, I got a response. You're hired. Start tomorrow night. Bring identification. Ask for Mr. Harlow. That was it. No interview, no phone call, nothing. It should have been a red flag. Instead, I felt lucky. That was my first mistake. The next evening, I drove out to the station. It sat nearly 20 miles outside town, surrounded by endless forest, no nearby houses, no businesses, nothing, just darkness, and a lonely gas station. The sign flickered weakly. Red Pine Gas. Half the letters were burned out. The building itself looked old, very old, like it hadn't been renovated since the 1980s. The parking lot was empty. No cars, no customers, no sounds, just wind. For some reason, I suddenly didn't want to go inside. I couldn't explain why. The place felt wrong, not dangerous, not abandoned, just wrong, like something invisible was standing nearby watching me, waiting. I entered. A bell chimed above the door. The station smelled like old coffee and dust. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. An elderly man stood behind the counter, thin, gray hair, sharp eyes. He looked around 70. Mr. Harlow? I asked. He nodded. You Ethan? Yeah. He stared at me for several seconds, then sighed. You're younger than the last one. I laughed nervously. The last what? His expression didn't change. Employee? Something about the way he said it bothered me. He took me into a small break room behind the counter. There was a refrigerator, a microwave, a table, and a piece of paper taped to the wall. The paper was old, yellowed, the edges curled. The title read, Hashed Nightshift Rules. There were 11 of them. I smiled. Oh, is this one of those funny workplace things? Mr. Harlow didn't smile back, not even a little. Read them. So I did. The 11 rules. Rule 1, between midnight and 1 a.m., if pump 4 activates by itself, do not look outside. Disable the pump remotely. Wait exact. Rule 2, if a customer enters wearing a red raincoat, do not speak first. If they ask for cigarettes, tell them you're sold out, even if cigarettes are visible behind you. Rule 3, at 2:17 a.m., the store lights may briefly turn off. Keep your eyes closed until they return. Rule 4, never enter the restroom after 3 a.m., no matter what you hear inside. Rule 5, if someone knocks on the back employee entrance, ignore them. Employees are never scheduled after midnight. Rule 6, if a child enters alone, check their reflection in the refrigerator door before speaking. If no reflection appears, lock yourself in the office immediately. Rule 7, at exactly 4:03 a.m., count the aisles. There should be 7. If there are 8, do not enter the extra aisle. Rule 8, if you hear your name spoken from outside, do not respond, even if it sounds like someone you know. Rule 9, the security monitor should display 8 cameras. If a 9th camera appears, cover the monitor with the provided cloth for 10 minutes. Rule 10, if an elderly woman asks whether you've seen her husband, tell her, he already crossed the road, nothing else. Rule 11, if you survive until sunrise, leave immediately. Do not stay after 7:01 a.m., not for any reason. I stared at the page, then looked at Mr. Harlow. Seriously? He nodded. Memorize them. I laughed. He didn't. And that was when I started feeling uneasy, because something in his eyes told me he wasn't joking. At all. I worked my first shift that night. Nothing happened. Literally nothing. A few customers came through, truck drivers, late-night commuters, one tired nurse. That was it. The shift was boring. Easy money. By sunrise, I was convinced the rules were some weird initiation prank. The second shift was the same. The third, the fourth, the fifth. 1 week passed. Nothing strange happened. Nothing. I started making plans for my paycheck, paying rent, buying groceries, maybe even upgrading my computer. Life finally seemed to be improving. Then came the 8th night. The first time Rule 1 happened, and that was when everything began. It was 12:24 a.m. I was scrolling through my phone behind the counter. The station was empty, silent. Then I heard a click, a loud metallic click. I glanced up. Pump 4's activation light was glowing, bright green. I froze. No vehicle was outside, no customer, nothing. The pump had turned on by itself. For a moment, I remembered Rule 1. I laughed nervously. Coincidence, had to be. Then the pump began dispensing fuel, by itself. My laughter died instantly. I checked the security monitor. The display showed gasoline pouring from the nozzle onto the pavement, yet nobody was holding it. Nobody was there. I felt cold, very cold. Rule 1, don't look outside. Disable the pump. Wait 5 minutes. For the first time, I followed a rule, not because I believed it, but because something deep inside me suddenly didn't want to find out what happened if I didn't. So I shut off the pump remotely and waited. 4 minutes passed. Nothing happened. Then, a hand pressed against the front window. A pale human hand from outside. I nearly screamed because there was nobody attached to it, just a hand, pressing against the glass, slowly sliding downward, leaving a dark smear behind. 5 minutes ended. The hand vanished, like it had never existed. That night I went home shaken, but I still convinced myself there had to be an explanation. A prank, a hallucination, fatigue, anything. I was wrong because Rule 1 was only the beginning, and before the month was over, I would learn why the previous employee never came back. The customer in the red raincoat. After the incident with Pump 4, I stopped laughing at the rules. Not because I suddenly believed in ghosts, not because I thought monsters were lurking in the woods, but because I had seen something that shouldn't have existed. A hand. Just a hand. No body, no person, nothing. And it had vanished. I barely slept that day. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pale fingers dragging across the glass. I kept replaying the scene, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe someone had been crouching beneath the window. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe the excuses were getting harder to believe. That night, I returned to work. The entire drive there felt different. The forest seemed darker. The road seemed longer. The station itself looked even more isolated than before. As if it were somehow farther away from civilization than it had been yesterday. I hated that thought, but it wouldn't leave me. Mr. Harlow was waiting when I arrived. He looked at me, then he asked a question. Just one. Did you follow the rule? I nodded. His shoulders relaxed slightly. Good. That was it. No explanation, no discussion, no comfort, just good. Then he left, leaving me alone again. The next few nights were quiet. Not normal, just quiet. There is a difference. When something terrible is hiding nearby, silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like a warning. Around midnight, I'd find myself staring at Pump 4, waiting for it to activate. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it did. Whenever it happened, I followed the rule, every single time. I never looked outside. Not once. Then came night 12, the night I met the customer in the red raincoat. It was raining. A cold, steady rain, the kind that turns everything into shadows. The parking lot glistened under the station lights. Water dripped from the roof, wind rattled the windows. Business was slow, very slow. I was reading class notes behind the counter when the bell above the door chimed. Someone entered. At first, I only noticed the color, red. Bright red, like fresh blood. Then I remembered Rule 2. If a customer enters wearing a red raincoat, do not speak first. If they ask for cigarettes, tell them you're sold out, even if cigarettes are visible behind you. A cold knot formed in my stomach. The customer walked toward the counter, slowly, very slowly. He wore an old-fashioned raincoat, dark red. The hood covered his face, water dripped onto the floor, yet somehow the raincoat looked dry. That didn't make sense. He'd just come in from a storm, but there wasn't a single wet spot on it. He stopped at the register. Neither of us spoke. Several seconds passed, then a minute, then another. The figure remained perfectly still, not moving, not blinking, not breathing, at least not that I could see. Finally he spoke. His voice sounded wrong, like multiple people speaking at once, like overlapping whispers. Cigarettes, my heart immediately began hammering. I looked behind me. The cigarette shelf was completely full, hundreds of packs, clearly visible. I swallowed, then forced myself to answer. Sorry, we're sold out. Silence. The figure stood motionless. Then slowly, very slowly, its head tilted. I heard something crack, like bones. The tilt continued, farther, 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 until the head was nearly sideways. I felt sick. Then the customer asked, "Are you sure?" The voice sounded closer, even though he hadn't moved. Yes, more silence. Then the figure straightened, turned around, and walked out. The bell chimed. The door closed. Gone. I exhaled. My shirt was soaked with sweat. Then I noticed something. There were no footprints. The floor beneath him was completely dry, as if he had never entered. I spent the rest of the shift staring at the door, waiting for him to return. He never did. The next morning, I asked Mr. Harlow, who was the guy in the raincoat? For the first time, the old man looked genuinely uncomfortable. Don't ask questions. Was he human? No answer. Has he been here before? Still nothing. Then Mr. Harlow quietly said, "You're still alive." He looked me directly in the eyes. "That means you answered correctly." And then he walked away. That night, something even worse happened. Something involving Rule 6. The child, up until then, Rule 6 had sounded ridiculous. If a child enters alone, check their reflection in the refrigerator door before speaking. If no reflection appears, lock yourself in the office immediately. It sounded like a creepy campfire story. Nothing more. At 2:41 a.m., the bell rang. I looked up. A little girl stood inside the store, alone, maybe 7 years old, long dark hair, pink jacket, mud-covered shoes. No parents, no car outside, no explanation. She simply stood there, looking at me, smiling. Something about the smile bothered me instantly. It wasn't a child's smile. It looked practiced, artificial, like someone pretending to be a child. Then I remembered Rule 6. My stomach dropped. Slowly, I turned toward the refrigerator doors beside the drinks section. The metal surface reflected most of the store, including the little girl, or at least it should have. I looked, and nearly collapsed. The aisle was visible, the shelves were visible, the lights were visible. But the girl wasn't. There was nothing there, an empty space where her reflection should have been. My blood turned to ice. Rule 6. No reflection. Lock yourself in the office immediately. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted. The office door slammed behind me. I locked it, then pushed a filing cabinet against it. My hands shook violently. Outside the office, everything became silent. Too silent. Then came footsteps. Tiny footsteps, walking through the store. Slowly, methodically, getting closer. Closer, closer, until they stopped outside the office. I held my breath. Then I heard a little girl's voice, right outside the door. "Ethan?" My entire body froze. I had never told her my name. The voice giggled. "Ethan?" A pause. Then, "Why are you hiding?" I said nothing. The handle slowly began turning. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Then came scratching. Soft at first, then harder, then much harder. Something was dragging sharp nails across the door. I could hear wood splintering. The scratching continued for nearly 15 minutes. Then suddenly stopped. Complete silence. I remained in the office until sunrise. When I finally emerged, the store was empty. No child, no footprints, no sign she had ever been there. Except for one thing, the office door. 4 deep claw marks ran down the center bay, each groove nearly an inch deep, far deeper than any child could make. I stared at them, unable to move, unable to think. Because for the first time, I knew with absolute certainty that the rules were real. And something else, something far worse. The rules weren't there to protect the gas station. They were there to protect me. Because whatever visited this place at that night wasn't trying to scare people. It was hunting. And I had just survived another encounter. But something had changed, something I wouldn't fully understand until later. Because when I reviewed the security footage that morning, I discovered something impossible. The cameras never recorded the little girl entering the store. There was no footage of her arriving, no footage of her leaving, nothing. But at exactly 2:41 a.m., One frame showed her standing directly behind me, less than a foot away, smiling, watching me before I ever looked up. And that was the moment I noticed something else, something hidden among the camera feeds, something that shouldn't have existed. A ninth camera, one that wasn't supposed to be there. And in that camera's image, someone was standing in the woods, watching the station, watching me, waiting. The moment I saw the ninth camera, I forgot how to breathe. I was sitting in the office after sunrise, reviewing the security footage from the night before, the footage of the little girl, or whatever she was. I wanted proof that I hadn't imagined everything. Proof that exhaustion wasn't making me lose my mind. Instead, I found something worse. Much worse. The monitor normally displayed 8 camera feeds, exactly 8. The front counter, the entrance, the parking lot, the pumps, the storage room, the rear hallway, the side lot, and the forest-facing exterior camera. 8. Always 8. But now there were 9. A small black square had appeared in the bottom corner. Feed 9. I stared at it, certain it was some software glitch. Then I looked closer. My stomach dropped. The camera wasn't showing part of the gas station. It was showing the forest, deep forest, far beyond the property line. The image was grainy, dark, almost impossible to make out, because someone was standing there. A figure, tall, thin, motionless, watching the station, watching me. Even through the low-quality image, I could tell one thing. It wasn't human. Its limbs were too long, far too long. Its arms hung below its knees. Its neck seemed stretched, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, and it wasn't moving, not even slightly, just staring. The longer I looked, the more wrong it felt, like my brain couldn't properly process what it was seeing. Then the screen flickered, and the figure was closer. I jumped so hard my chair nearly tipped over. There hadn't been a transition. No walking, no movement. One frame, it was deep in the woods. The next frame, it was closer, at least 20 feet closer. I blinked, closer again, another jump, another impossible distance crossed. Closer, 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 until it stood at the edge of the tree line. And then the screen went black. I immediately remembered Rule 9. The security monitor should display 8 cameras. If a 9th camera appears, cover the monitor with the provided cloth for 10 minutes. The cloth. I looked around the office. There it was, folded neatly beside the monitor, exactly where it always sat. My hands shook as I grabbed it and threw it over the screen. Then I waited. 10 minutes. The longest 10 minutes of my life. The entire time I felt like something was standing outside the office, listening, waiting. When the timer finally ended, I pulled the cloth away. The 9th camera was gone. Only 8 remained. But I never forgot the thing I'd seen. And unfortunately, that wasn't the worst thing that week. Not even close. Because 3 nights later, Rule 7 activated. The extra aisle. The rule I had always considered the stupidest. At exactly 4:03 a.m., count the aisles. There should be 7. If there are 8, do not enter the extra aisle. How could an aisle simply appear? The store wasn't changing dimensions. That was impossible. At least that's what I believed. Until 4:03 a.m. The clock clicked over. Immediately, I walked into the store, mostly out of curiosity. 7 aisles. I counted carefully. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Normal. I sighed. Nothing unusual. Then something caught my eye. A gap. Near the back of the store. A space that hadn't been there before. I frowned, walked closer, and froze. There was an 8th aisle. A completely new aisle. Standing between aisle 6 and 7, I stared at it, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. The shelves stretched into darkness, farther than they should have, much farther. The gas station wasn't big enough to contain it. Yet there it was, an impossible aisle. My pulse hammered. I remembered the rule, do not enter. So naturally, I stepped closer, not inside, just closer. Close enough to peek. The shelves weren't stocked with snacks or drinks or groceries. They held photographs, thousands of photographs, every shelf, every level, every inch, photographs, my photographs. I stopped breathing. Pictures of me at school, at home, walking across campus, sleeping in my apartment, studying, driving, eating, maybe thousands. Pictures that should not exist, pictures taken from impossible angles, Some looked decades old, even though they were taken days earlier. Others showed moments I couldn't remember. Then I saw something horrifying. The photographs continued into the future. One image showed me standing inside the gas station, holding a flashlight. Another showed me bleeding. Another showed me running through the woods. Another showed me staring directly into the camera, terrified. And then I found the last photograph. It sat alone near the end of the aisle. I could barely see it, but I recognized myself immediately. I was lying on the forest floor, motionless, eyes open, dead. Something stood behind me. The same figure from the ninth camera. Its face was blurred. Its hand rested on my shoulder. I stumbled backward. The photo slipped from my finger, and suddenly something moved inside the aisle, deep within the darkness. A sound, footsteps, slow, heavy, coming toward me. My entire body locked up. The footsteps continued. Closer, closer, closer. Then I saw movement between the shelves. A silhouette, extremely tall, far taller than any human. The head nearly touched the ceiling, and it was approaching. Slowly, purposefully, like it knew I was there, like it had been waiting for a long time. A voice echoed from the darkness, not spoken, heard directly inside my head. You looked. I ran. I didn't think, didn't stop, didn't look back. I sprinted all the way to the counter. When I finally turned around, the 8th aisle was gone. Only 7 remained, as though nothing had happened, but I knew what I'd seen. And worse, I knew I had broken the rule. I hadn't entered the aisle, but I had looked inside, and something inside had noticed me. For the next week, strange things began happening. Small things at first. I'd hear footsteps behind me. Nobody there. I'd see movement in mirrors. Nothing when I turned around. Products would appear in different locations. Shelves rearranged themselves. The clock occasionally skipped entire minutes. And every night, exactly at 3:17 a.m., I felt watched. Not casually watched. Observed. Like prey. Like something was studying me, learning me, waiting. Then came the voice. The first time I heard it, I nearly crashed my car. I was driving home after sunrise. The road was empty. The radio was off. Everything was quiet. Then someone whispered into my ear, "You looked." I slammed the brakes. The car skidded sideways. My heart nearly exploded. But there was nobody there. No passenger. No one in the back seat. Nothing. Just that voice. The same voice from the extra aisle. And from that day onward, I heard it more often. Every few nights. Always the same words. You looked. As if reminding me. As if warning me. Or maybe promising something. I tried quitting. I really did. The following week, I told Mr. Harlow I was done. I didn't care about the money anymore. I wanted out. I wanted my life back. I wanted normal. Mr. Harlow listened quietly. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. You can leave. I nodded, relieved. Then he continued, but it won't leave you. Silence filled the room. I stared at him. What won't? The old man looked toward the forest outside. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he whispered, the thing beyond the 8th aisle. I felt ice spread through my chest, because his face looked terrified. And if something could scare Mr. Harlow, then I couldn't even imagine how dangerous it truly was. Then he told me something he'd never told any employee before. Something about the previous night cashier, the one who had worked here before me, the one who disappeared, the one nobody ever saw again. Because according to Mr. Harlow, the previous cashier had entered the 8th aisle, and what came back out wasn't him. What came back out, I couldn't stop thinking about what Mr. Harlow had said. The previous cashier entered the 8th aisle. What came back out wasn't him. Those words followed me everywhere, to class, to my apartment, into my dreams, especially my dreams. For weeks, my sleep became a nightmare. Every night, I found myself standing inside the gas station. The store was empty, silent, dark. Then I'd hear the sound, footsteps, slow, heavy, coming from the extra aisle. And every dream ended the same way. The thing from the darkness would emerge. Just before I saw its face, I would wake up screaming. The dreams got worse after that, because eventually I started seeing the 8th aisle outside the station. The first time happened on campus. I was walking between classes when I glanced down a hallway. For a split second, there were 8 hallways, then 7. Back to normal. The second time happened inside a grocery store. An extra aisle appeared, only for a moment, then vanished. Nobody else reacted. Nobody else saw it. Only me. Something had attached itself to me. I knew it. I could feel it. And deep down, I knew why, because I looked. I had broken the rule, not completely, but enough. Enough for something to notice me. Enough for something to remember my face. And then came Rule 10, the elderly woman. Up until then, I'd never encountered her. I assumed she was another weird story, another bizarre rule. I was wrong. Very wrong. It happened during a thunderstorm, the kind that shakes the entire building. Rain hammered the roof, wind screamed through the trees, lightning flashed constantly. At 1:48 a.m., the doorbell chimed. An old woman entered. She looked ancient, 90, maybe older, thin white hair, pale skin, long gray dress, and despite the storm, she wasn't wet, not even slightly. I immediately remembered Rule 10. If an elderly woman asks whether you've seen her husband, tell her he already crossed the road. Nothing else. She approached the counter, slowly, painfully slowly. Each step seemed deliberate, as though she had all the time in the world. Finally, she reached me. Then she smiled. The smile wasn't threatening. That somehow made it worse, because it looked genuinely sad. Lonely, like she'd been searching for something for a very long time. Then she asked, "Young man," her voice trembled, "have you seen my husband?" The store suddenly felt colder. I swallowed. He already crossed the road. The old woman stared at me. For several seconds she said nothing. Then tears filled her eyes. Actual tears. And she whispered, "Oh." Just that, "Oh." Then she nodded around. Slowly walking toward the door, the bell chimed. She disappeared into the storm. I stood there for nearly a minute, trying to understand why I felt horrible. Because she hadn't seemed dangerous, she seemed heartbroken, like someone grieving. The next morning, I finally confronted Mr. Harlow. "Who is she?" "For once," he answered. "She's looking for him." "For who?" "Him." I waited. Eventually, he sighed. "Many years ago, there was a road accident." His voice was quiet. "The husband died instantly. The wife survived fully. I listened to something disturbing. She never accepted it." "Accepted what?" "That he was gone." A pause. "She searched every night for 40 years. I frowned. 40 years? Mr. Harlow nodded. "And eventually she died too." The room became silent. Then he added, "But she still searches." I wasn't sure what frightened me more, the statement itself, or how casually he said it. Then things got worse. Much worse. Because Rule 8 finally activated, the voices, the rule that sounded harmless. If you hear your name spoken from outside, do not respond, even if it sounds like someone you know. At first it happened rarely, a whisper, a faint call, barely audible. Then it started happening every night. The voices changed, sometimes my mother, sometimes my father, sometimes friends, sometimes professors, sometimes complete strangers. Yet they all said the same thing. "Ethan." Nothing else, just my name, over and over, always from outside. Always beyond the glass. One night I heard my childhood best friend, the friend who had died in a car crash when we were 16. My blood turned cold immediately, because the voice was perfect. Exactly perfect. The same tone, the same accent, the same laugh. "Ethan." A pause. "Ethan, come outside." I nearly answered. Nearly. Then I remembered the rule. I stayed silent. The voice continued for 20 minutes. Begging, pleading, laughing, crying, anything to get a response. Eventually it stopped, but from that night onward, the voices became more aggressive, more desperate, as though they were running out of patience. Then came the night I almost died. The night of Rule 3. The lights. The rule I'd followed several times before, at 2:17 a.m. The lights go out. Keep your eyes closed, wait for them to return. Simple. Easy. Except that night something changed. The power failed exactly on schedule. Darkness swallowed the station. I immediately shut my eyes and waited. 1 second, 2, 3. Then I heard breathing. Right beside me. Not across the room, not near the door, beside me, close enough to touch. The breathing sounded wet, heavy, wrong. I clenched my eyes tighter, the breathing continued. Then came a voice whispering directly into my ear. Open your eyes. I froze. The voice sounded familiar, terribly familiar. It sounded exactly like me. Open your eyes. The breathing grew louder. Look at me. I could feel something standing inches away. I could smell it. Rot. Damp earth. Something dead. Then a hand touched my shoulder. Ice cold. Human-shaped. I nearly screamed. The lights suddenly returned. I opened my eyes. The station was empty. Nothing there. Nothing at all, except for one thing. A muddy handprint. On my shoulder. Exactly where I'd felt the touch. That was the night I realized something. Something terrifying. The rules weren't preventing encounters. The encounters were happening anyway. The rules merely prevented the encounters from becoming fatal. And whatever controlled this place was becoming increasingly interested in me. Because every rule I followed, every night I survived, seemed to make it more curious, more aware, more focused. Then, 3 nights later, Mr. Harlow finally revealed the truth behind Rule 11, the final rule, the most important rule, the one that terrified him more than all the others combined. And once I learned what it meant, I understood why none of the previous employees lasted long. Because Rule 11 wasn't about surviving the night. It was about escaping something that arrived after sunrise. Something even the monsters feared. The thing that comes after sunrise. If you had asked me during my first week what the most dangerous thing at Red Pine gas station was, I would have said Pump 4, or the girl without a reflection, or the thing from the 8th aisle. By the end of my second month, I knew better. Those things were terrifying, but they weren't the worst. Not even close. The worst thing at Red Pine gas station never appeared at night. It came after sunrise. The realization started with Mr. Harlow. Over the weeks I'd worked there, I'd noticed something strange. He always left before 11 p.m. Always, and he always returned after 7:15 a.m. Never earlier, never later. One morning, after another miserable shift, I stopped him in the parking lot. Why does Rule 11 exist? His expression changed instantly. Not annoyance. Not frustration. Fear. Real fear. The kind of fear that comes from experience. For several seconds, he simply stared at the station, then toward the forest, then back at me. Finally, he sighed. You've survived longer than most. That wasn't an answer. I pressed harder. What happens after 7:01? He remained silent. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. Have you ever wondered why the station is open 24 hours? I frowned. Because it's a gas station. No. His voice was unusually firm. It's because it can't be closed. A cold feeling settled in my chest. What does that mean? Mr. Harlow looked exhausted, like a man carrying a burden he was tired of carrying. Then he spoke. Long before you were born, there was another building here. I listened carefully. There wasn't a gas station. There wasn't a road. There wasn't even a town, only forest. The wind stirred around us, and for some reason I felt colder with every word. In 1964, he continued, something was found in these woods. A pause. Nobody knows exactly what. An animal? I asked. No. Human? No. Another pause. Worse. That answer bothered me more than anything else he could have said. Mr. Harlow continued. A group of loggers vanished. Search teams vanished. Police vanished. Eventually, people stopped going into that part of the forest. I waited. Then construction started. Construction? The station. I stared. The station was built to contain it. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was insane. Contain what? His eyes met mine, and I immediately wished they hadn't because he genuinely believed what he was saying. Nobody knows. That was somehow worse. The conversation ended there. He refused to say more, but now I couldn't stop thinking about it. The station wasn't normal. The rules weren't normal. The things visiting the station weren't normal. And apparently, they weren't the reason the station existed. Something else was. Something beneath all of it. Something older. Something waiting. The next few nights were uneventful, at least compared to everything else. The raincoat man appeared twice, the old woman appeared once, the voices continued. The eighth aisle showed up 3 separate times. I never looked inside again. And yet, something felt different, like the atmosphere itself had changed. The station felt tense, expectant, like something huge was approaching. Then came the night. Everything fell apart. December 18th. I remember the date perfectly, because it was the last normal day of my life. The shift began quietly. Midnight came. Nothing. 1 a.m. Nothing. 2 a.m. Nothing. Even Pump 4 remained inactive. The silence felt unnatural, like every creature that usually haunted the station had suddenly disappeared. At 3:30 a.m., I realized something horrifying. The voices had stopped. Completely. For the first time in weeks. No whispers, no names, no laughter, nothing. The station felt empty, and that frightened me far more than hearing them, because predators become quiet when something bigger arrives. At 4:03 a.m., the extra aisle appeared, but something was different. The aisle looked empty. No photographs, no darkness, just shelves, abandoned, like whatever lived there had left. At 5:11 a.m., the security monitor flickered. The 9th camera appeared. Again, only this time there was no figure in the woods. The forest was empty. Every camera showed emptiness. The station had been abandoned by everything. At 6:42 a.m., I heard something outside. Not a voice, a sound, a deep vibration, like distant thunder, except the sky was clear. The vibration continued, growing stronger, stronger, stronger. The shelves began shaking. Bottles rattled. The windows trembled. My teeth vibrated, and then everything stopped. The silence afterward felt unbearable. The clock read 6:58 a.m., 3 minutes until Rule 11. I grabbed my backpack, ready to leave. Then I noticed movement. Outside, at the edge of the forest, hundreds of figures stood among the trees. The raincoat man, the old woman, the little girl, shapes I had never seen before. Dozens, maybe hundreds. All standing perfectly still, facing one direction, not toward the station, away from it, as though they were watching something approach from deeper in the woods. And then every figure did something I'd never seen before. They stepped backward, retreating, fearfully, like animals fleeing a wildfire. My heart began pounding, because if those things were afraid, what could possibly frighten them? The clock changed. 7 a.m. The vibration returned, stronger than before. The windows cracked. A light bulb exploded overhead. The air pressure changed. I could barely breathe. Then something emerged from the forest. At first, I thought it was fog, a dark shape moving between the trees. Massive, far too massive. The trees around it looked tiny, like grass around a person. My brain struggled to understand what I was seeing. The shape seemed wrong. Its size changed every time I looked at it. Sometimes it appeared hundreds of feet tall, sometimes miles, sometimes larger than the entire forest. My eyes hurt trying to focus. Then every instinct I possessed screamed one command: run. The clock read 7:43. I threw the store, past the pumps, toward my car. Behind me, the station groaned. The entire building shook violently. Glass shattered. Metal screamed. I jumped into my car, started the engine. I reversed so hard I nearly hit a pump. Then I drove, as fast as possible. And in my rearview mirror, I saw it. For less than a second. A silhouette towering above the forest, watching the station, watching everything, watching me. Then the road curved and it vanished. I didn't stop driving until I reached town. Even then, I kept looking over my shoulder, certain something was following me. That morning, I quit, for real. I called Mr. Harlow, told him I was done. He simply replied, "I know." Then he hung up. I never returned. At least, not voluntarily. Because 6 months later, I received a package. No return address, no postage. Just a plain cardboard box sitting outside my apartment. Inside was a photograph. Only one. The picture showed the interior of Red Pine gas station. The image was recent, very recent, because standing behind the counter was me, working a night shift, smiling, and written on the back were 5 words: "You never really left." That was the day I realized the story wasn't over, because the station hadn't let me go. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the eighth aisle, something was still watching, still waiting, and somehow still expecting me to come back.